This is the iconic Beatles White Album. It's one of the greatest albums in classic rock history, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to make it better. This well-worn book is Beatles Songs by William J. Dowling. It's got a quote from the Beatles producer George Martin that I always found very interesting. I tried to plead with them to be selective and make a really good single album, but they wouldn't have it. And that quote always made me wonder, what would the White Album be if it was just a single LP? So in this video, I'm going to go song by song, and I'm going to pick out the best of the best and make what I feel is the perfect single White Album. The first two songs are pretty much no-brainers. Back in the USSR was a Paul song that was written as maybe a parody, maybe a tribute to their creative rival, the Beach Boys, who came out with Pet Sounds, and then the Beatles came out with Sgt. Pepper. So in the White Album, they do a very Beach Boys sounding song. Song number 2 is John's Dear Prudence. The most important event that molded the direction of the White Album was the Beatles' trip to India for the Maharishi's retreat. They only had acoustic instruments out there, and this song kind of sets the tone that you're going to hear for the rest of the album. I think it's got the best transition, maybe in the whole Beatles catalog, between songs from back in the USSR to the beginning of this. So you'll notice I mentioned the authorship of the song, and that's important because the criteria of this is it's got to fit what a Beatles album really is. That means there's an equal number of Paul and John songs, plus they're going to throw in a couple George songs and a couple of Ringo songs. I think I'm just going to do 1 Ringo song, 2 George songs, and I'll try to get 6 songs for each of John and Paul. So we're going to go 3 for 3, and the next song is Glass Onion, which is a John song. This is the first rock song that I could think of that had a lot of Easter eggs in it. There were references to Strawberry Fields, Fool in the Hill, Lady Madonna, Fixing a Hole, which was written the day I was born, and I Am the Walrus. So John was being a little bit playful with this, and George actually calls this one of his favorite songs on the album too. Okay, let's get a little controversial. Obla Di, Obla Da. Now, the first Beatles album was recorded in just 13 hours, and this song alone took 4 days. It splintered the group because this is exactly what was wrong with them at the time. Paul was into pop music, John was into experimental music, Paul was a perfectionist, John was more freeform. And John just went into the studio that day. He was tired of doing this song, and he just banged on the piano. He said, let's get it over with. The Beatles didn't spend a whole lot of time on the next song, and neither will I. Wild Honey Pie is just the fragment of a song. It's only 52 seconds long, and Paul worked on it alone. It didn't mean much to the album, doesn't mean much to me. The continuing story of Bungalow Bill was a tough omission, not because of the quality of the song, but because of its significance. It's about a guy that was on the Maharishi retreat that John wasn't so fond of, so he wrote this bitter little tune. But the significance is Yoko Ono appears in the song. This is just one of those examples of watching the Beatles break up in real time. The next is the first of 2 George songs, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Now you might say, why are you putting this song in? Because Eric Clapton is playing guitar. But George took it to the whole band. They weren't really that interested, so he brought Eric in, and it is just a great, great song. I can't imagine the White Album without it. Probably the most John song on this album is Happiness is a Warm Gun. The White Album is a little bit of a departure from the psychedelic Beatles of Sgt. Pepper. The songs are a little bit more straightforward, but this is very experimental. It's in 3 parts, and I love that fuzz guitar. My hardest Paul song omission is probably Martha My Dear. As John said, Paul wrote Granny, and this is part of it, but I do like the song. It's about his sheepdog. It's kind of cute, but Paul has better songs on the album. By the time they recorded the White Album, the carefree days of the Fab Four were long gone. Manager Brian Epstein was dead, and John wrote I'm So Tired to just talk about how fed up he was with the band, with the press, with touring, with Paul. He got very angry towards the end. This was the first John song that didn't make the cut for me. I'm kind of sad, but I wanted to have the equal number of songs between Paul and John. There are certain songs that simply cannot be omitted from the perfect single White Album. Blackbird is one of them. This song is amazing. It's Paul McCartney at his best. He's a virtuoso, and he was listening to the folk explosion of bands like the Byrds and Bob Dylan and the Mamas and Papas, and he did his version of an acoustic number that just is better than all of them. It also had political relevance and has become somewhat of an anthem for the civil rights movement of the late 60s. George has 4 songs on the album, one being Piggies. Now, this song is about greed and capitalism, and we have enough John cynicism on our short album, so I'm going to take this one out. The very reason for doing this exercise is songs like Rocky Raccoon. Now, I'll give Paul a little bit of credit. He wanted to do something whimsical, and he wanted to just do a genre that had never been done by the Beatles, so he's got this ragtime player piano sounding thing. He uses what I think is a little bit of an insulting American accent, and it just feels like filler to me. The first of 2 Ringo songs on the White Album is Don't Pass Me By. Now, this is the second straight song on the album with that kind of hillbilly country feel, and I think Ringo's other song on the album is much better, so I will be passing this one by. There were times when Paul treated the White Album sessions like it was his own solo project. Why Don't We Do It in the Road was one of those times. Paul went into a different part of the studio, wrote, sung, played all the instruments, and mixed the song on his own with no other input from the band members. John was taken aback by this, his feelings were hurt, and I'm putting it on this album because it really does tell the story of where the Beatles were as a band at the time. Similar to the last tune, I Will is just Paul going off into another studio and doing something on his own. Well, at least he took Ringo this time. But it took them 67 takes to make this song, and it just feels like filler to me. While Paul's love songs are clean but somewhat generic, Julia by John is typical of the very personal things that he would write in his love songs. It's a tribute to his mother, Julia, who had passed on, but there's also references to Yoko, like the line Ocean Child, which is what Yoko means in Japanese. Well, that's the end of the first disc of the real White Album and side 1 of my White Album. I only selected 8 out of 17 songs, so you see there's a lot of filler, but I think the percentage will be a little bit better in my side too. I'm going to start side 2 much like I started 1 with an absolute slam dunk. Birthday by Paul McCartney was one of those outlier songs where everybody was in the studio at once, they were having a good time, and you can even hear Patty Harrison and Yoko in the background singing. This is also a little bit of a personal thing to me too, because I seem to play it every year for my good friend Doug Bunkbed Gear, the guy who got me into the Beatles all those years ago. Okay, just to prove that I'm not wild about every John song, Your Blues is next up. This song is kind of depressing. He talks about wanting to die. It actually appeared later in the Rock and Roll Circus by the Rolling Stones, so you are going to be able to hear it eventually, but not on my White Album. I'd be remiss if I didn't put one of Paul's polished pop songs on here. It was between Mother Nature's Son and Martha, My Dear. I think Mother Nature's Son is a little bit better, and it reminds me of Fool on the Hill from the disastrous Magical Mystery Tour. Actually, I think it's what Fool on the Hill wanted to be. One of my favorite songs on the whole album is John's Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey. Now that's a mouthful, and it's an atypical John song for this period because it's absolutely joyous. He's singing about Yoko, you can hear the fire bells and the maracas, and it's just a good time. Another bitter John song was Sexy Sadie. He wrote it upon leaving India when he found out that the Maharishi was being a bit of a womanizer. He was disenchanted, he felt the Maharishi was a scam artist, and he actually named the song Maharishi, but he changed it to Sexy Sadie so it wouldn't be on the nose. You can't talk about Helter Skelter without talking about Charles Manson. Now, Manson claimed that Helter Skelter and at least 6 or 7 other songs on the White Album gave him the inspiration to go and do what he did. Well, nobody decided to tell him that Paul's song was actually about a fairground ride. I think the song is bananas. It's a great song. It's the rockinest song on the album, so it is definitely going to stay in spite of the Manson thing. George had 2 really good songs and 2 silly songs, so of course my second George song will be Long, Long, Long. This is also important because you can't really ignore all the Paul is dead rumors. There's clues all over the White Album, including in the songs and on the art inside the cover. But the recreation of the car crash where Paul died at the end is enough to include this onto my White Album. Helter Skelter was my last Paul song, Long, Long, Long was my last George song, and my last John song is Revolution No. 1. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the White Album, you might hear this and say, hey, that's not Revolution from the Nike commercial.
You say you want a revolution.
Well, it's not, but it retains the same spirit. It's just a little bit slowed down in acoustic. To be honest with you, if I was running the show, I would use the single version. Paul's last number on the album should be blown into outer space. Honey Pie is one of those songs that when your dad plays it, you just laugh about how out of touch he is. It's a ragtime number with clarinets and trombones that John said of, I don't even want to think about it. Of the 4 George songs on the White Album, Savoy Truffle is the easiest one to leave out. It's really trite, and as a matter of fact, the lyrics came from a box of chocolates that his friend Eric Clapton was eating. In post-Beatles interviews, John often called Paul's stuff rubbish. Cry Baby Cry was his own song that he called rubbish. It's also at the end of this album, and it just doesn't belong. It's filler. Now we come to Revolution No. 9, which might be the most polarizing song on a rock album ever. John and Yoko sat down, they cut up a bunch of sound effects and tape loops and just made the most disconnected cacophony of just chaos that I've ever heard on an album in my life. The song is 8 minutes and 22 seconds long. It's very hard to sit through. It just is probably what John had envisioned would be the future of music. And you know what? It just doesn't belong on a Beatles album. So the only justification I would have for keeping Revolution No. 9 is Ringo's Good Night. It comes at the end of the White Album, and it is just this soothing transition between the unhinged Revolution 9 and just takes the album out in a really nice note. This is also my only Ringo song in the album, so even though John wrote it, it has to be on here anyway. So that's my perfect single White Album. The only change I'm making is I'm using the single version instead of the album version of Revolution 1, and that'll bring back that nice transition from chaos to goodnight at the end of the album. So what do you think? Thank you for watching. Let me know if I omitted any of your favorites from the White Album in the comments, and while you're there, please like, subscribe, and share. I appreciate all of you. It's been the time of my life making these videos for you. Cheers.